Alright everybody, this is a big day. This is the first time that Alan Scott, the original Golden Age Green Lantern, has had his own solo series since 1949. Isn't that unbelievable? Kind of puts into perspective just how much time he spends with the Justice Society, doesn't it? This is a 6-issue miniseries that we're going to be taking an in-depth look at every month, starting right now with issue number 1. The creative team of this book also did a short story published in the anthology DC Pride Through the Years #1, titled Past Prologue, that sets up this miniseries, but the events of the short story actually take place during this first issue, so I'm just going to talk about all of it at the same time. Alan Scott, The Green Lantern #1, written by Tim Sheridan, with art by Kian Tormey, colors by Matt Hermes, and letters by Lucas Gattoni. The title of this issue is Into the Fire. In the present day, Alan Scott is in the JSA headquarters looking through a box of old keepsakes from his days in the military. A shadowy figure comments that Alan never talks about that part of his past in any great detail, which prompts Alan to tell a story. Back in 1941, public opinion of the Green Lantern was at an all-time high. Alan made a name for himself as the hero of Gotham City before moving to New York, and very quickly earning the hearts and minds of the public. It was going so well, in fact, that FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover wanted to recruit Alan to join the Justice Society of America and help turn it into a team that the American people could believe in. We know, in hindsight, just how important the JSA was, and I'm sure some degree of that was taken into consideration when Hoover decided to push for this. But the real power of the JSA might just be how having them around made the American people feel. In terms of raising public morale, the team showing up together on the front page of the daily newspaper could do even more good than their actual crime-fighting efforts. Alan wants nothing to do with it. He works alone and wants to keep it that way. But Hoover is nothing if not well informed. He knows Alan's secret identity. He knows all of Alan's secrets, in fact, and uses that information to blackmail Alan into joining the JSA. And let's talk about that, because this is going to be one of the more controversial changes made to Alan's backstory. When we think of this era of DC history, we mythologize it. We apply a level of grandeur, as if history was being written by someone who always knew that this was going to be the foundation that future generations and legacies are built on. But we never really stop to think what it must have been like for the people at the center of those big historic moments. People who had no reason to believe that they were even doing the right thing. This is the JSA, the very first superhero team, in the very first generation of superheroes. There was no precedent for this sort of thing, nobody knew that it could work, and there was no way to know how important it would end up being. On top of that, anyone who wears a mask to protect their identity is going to get nervous about having to work closely with a group of people, because that breeds familiarity and makes it harder to keep secrets. And secrets are what this is all about, because Hoover's file on Alan tells the story of what happened the last time he worked as part of a team, and the tragedy that came as a result. In 1936, Alan was in the Army Corps of Engineers, and was working on a very unusual project. Comic books have always played with the idea that Hitler tried using the occult to win World War II, so the United States tried to get out in front of that potential threat by finding a magical weapon of their own. The engineers were tasked with building a device that could capture and contain the Crimson Flame, a mythical, eternal fire that's burned for centuries beneath the ocean. A power source like that could easily tip the scales in America's favor, no matter the opponent. Alan spent 2 years working out all the details and building the device with the help of his team, including Corporal Johnny Ladd. Alan and Johnny fell for each other pretty hard, and it made Alan happier than he'd ever been. But he was also freaking out, because he knew what would happen if anyone found out. Remember, it's 1936. If this got out, they both lose their jobs, their friends, be shunned by society, become the target of random hateful violence, and on top of that, they could go to jail. This kind of relationship was literally illegal. The metaphor of the Crimson Flame is a strong one. It's a magical, unquenchable fire that Alan and Johnny are desperately trying to find a way to hold on to, even though they know it's dangerous. It is their relationship, it is their future together. And just as Alan feared, it ended up being more than they were ready for. The Crimson Flame was the stuff of fairy tales, and they arrogantly thought they could just put it in a box. When they tried, they learned the hard way that the Crimson Flame wasn't just an eternal fire. It was alive. It was intelligent, and it was ready to defend itself. The ship nearly sank when the flame lashed out at them, until Alan released the portion of the Crimson Flame that they'd already captured. And just as he breathed a sigh of relief, the Crimson Flame reached out and took Johnny, pulling him into the abyss where nobody could follow. And as Alan watched the man he loved slip away, a voice spoke to him in his mind. A loud, demonic voice making the first of 3 promises. First, we bring death. Is the same message that was delivered by the Emerald Flame when it erupted from a meteor in China many years earlier. First to bring death, second to bring life, third to bring power. Everything he'd just seen and heard drove Alan mad, leading to him being committed in Arkham Asylum. Tim Sheridan's vision of Alan Scott's early years is filled with enough nods and references to the actual Golden Age stories that I have no problem believing he has respect for what came before. This story doesn't seem to be removing anything from Alan Scott's history, but rather is filling in the gaps with something new, and giving perspective that we couldn't have had before. This is only the first issue of 6, but so far it's giving us something that we've sorely needed for a long time now. An opportunity to take our time and focus on Alan Scott and his new status quo, outside of the very limiting constraints of his appearances in various anthologies. I do think it's a little much for Alan to be telling us this story across 3 different time periods at once, but so far it's managed to avoid being confusing. If there's one thing about this issue that I really do hate, it's that they killed Johnny. Why do we keep doing this? It's bad enough that the death of a loved one is an extremely overused, and at this point very cheap, way of motivating the main character, but how are we supposed to have confidence in DC's commitment to this new direction for Alan's character when they keep killing off all of his romantic partners? This is now the 2nd male love interest from Alan's past who tragically died. And that's not even counting the fiancé of the New 52 Earth 2 Alan Scott, who is an entirely different character from the main universe Alan Scott, but it still furthers the same problematic pattern. It's not enough to say that the character is gay, and very soon it won't be enough to intellectually explore what the character thinks about being gay. At a certain point, you just have to let the character live the life and be in a relationship that doesn't constantly have the grim shadow of death hanging over it. Overall, though, I'm happy with how this miniseries started. All of the changes made to Alan's character and history make sense when you think about it from the perspective of a person living in that world at that time. I think the biggest fear surrounding this book was that it was going to twist Alan Scott into something unrecognizable for the sake of pushing a pro-gay agenda. But listen, I've been reading comics my entire life, and I have read plenty of comics that were flat-out propaganda, and this is not one. This is a love story, pure and simple, and so far, it's a pretty well-written one. I expect a lot of people will have problems with it anyway, and some will find excuses to pick it apart in bad faith. I often see people comment that it doesn't make sense for Alan Scott, the original Green Lantern, a paragon of truth, justice, and willpower, to hide that he's gay, to lie to everyone, and give in to fear. But what that point of view misses is that Alan Scott isn't simply a set of values and standards to be upheld. He's a character. And when considering things like this, we have to think of him as a person. A person who lived his entire life in a society that explicitly hates what he now knows himself to be. It's important to remember that the whole concept of Green Lanterns being fearless was abandoned a long time ago. Characters like Kyle Rayner and Jessica Cruz, with all of their insecurities and anxieties, could never have received rings if Green Lanterns had to be fearless. Green Lanterns are chosen for their ability to overcome great fear. The thing that makes them worthy is the process of learning to deal with fear, even if it takes a lifetime. Alan Scott may not be part of the Green Lantern Corps, but I see no reason to hold him to a different standard, especially when he's going out there every day trying his best despite being afraid. Yes, Alan Scott being gay is a modern day retcon, but to be perfectly honest, it makes sense that he'd have to wait until now to reveal this part of himself. Thanks to the magic that fuels his ring, Alan has lived an unusually long life and has finally made it to an era where he could come out without losing everything. Now, you could argue that a beloved superhero coming out and championing the cause would have helped change people's minds a lot sooner. But it's just as likely that the public's trust in Green Lantern would be eroded by their belief that he's some kind of deviant, especially if he's the only public figure trying to make a difference. Besides, you have to learn how to accept yourself first before you can start changing the minds of others, and that alone can be a long journey. So that's my take on the first issue of Alan Scott, the Green Lantern. Now I want to know what you think. Who is the shadowy figure Alan is telling all of this to in the present day? What do you think about Alan not wanting to join the JSA? What is your favorite comic book retcon? Tell me all about it in the comments section down below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, so that we can continue exploring Alan Scott's new history when the next issue comes out. In the meantime, let me just say thank you for taking the time to watch. My name is Dan, we'll talk again soon.